back to the 41st episode of the Tundra Cast. In today's episode, we're going to have a Bleacher Report writer for the Chicago Blackhawks, and that's Mario Tirabassi.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I guess my first question for you would be, how did you get started at Bleacher Nation?
I started in January. Bleacher Nation has been around for a number of years. Started, with covering the Chicago Cubs, and then eventually the site expanded to the Bears, the Bulls, and then they opened it up to the Blackhawks division for this season, and got my start with them in January. Um, I've been hockey writing, blogging for a number of years for a number of different sites, and just kind of through moving through different places, kind of just gaining experience that way, and meeting a lot of different people along the ways, good people along the way. I guess they asked around, and I had some people put in some good words for me, so it was nice to get that recognition from them, and for them to trust me to kind of head up their division when they opened it up. So it's been going really good. I hit the ground running with them for this past season in January. It was like, all right, you're going to start January 4th, and that was like the same day that the like abbreviated training camps opened for last season. So it was just like boom, like right away. Um, but it's been good. Looking forward to season number 2 coming up pretty shortly here.
Right. During this preseason, which Blackhawk has surprised you, and which Blackhawk has disappointed you so far?
Hmm. Um, Disappointment. It's hard to be disappointed through training camp, I think, just because this is the first like real training camp that a lot of these guys have had in 2 years basically. So with last season there were a lot of players that kind of broke out, and had some opportunities that because the team wasn't as talented as it had been in previous years. Some young guys, some rookies had opportunities to break out during the season. I didn't really expect a lot of that, going through that training camp. So this training camp, I really wouldn't say anyone's really disappointed. I think the easy target might be Alex Nylander, but
Yeah.
he had a knee injury going into last season. He had surgery. He missed all of last year, and he already was kind of this player that people like to kind of poke at, to throw some blame at him. I think a lot of that comes from his name, his draft position when he was with the Sabres, and then also the trade that got him to Chicago. A lot of those things kind of work against him. He's not a bad player, but I don't think he's got the ability to live up to a lot of those different standards. And then yeah, he missed all of last year, so getting the rust off of him coming into this season, I think, is something that you would have hoped to have seen. But he'll go to Rockford, and he'll get a lot of playing time there. So hopefully he gets up to speed and can contribute to the Blackhawks at the NHL level, because even if people want to say like, oh, he's a bust or whatever, like you still want someone to succeed, because that means that they're helping your team. So I guess if you want to label it a disappointment that he didn't make the team out of camp, that would be one of them. A surprise though, I would say Jakob Galvis was a standout. Coming over as a rookie from Europe is never easy, but he's not the typical like rookie. He's played the last 5 seasons in Europe, in the Czech Pro League and in Finland in the last 2 seasons. He's got over 200 games professionally in Europe. Starting as a teenager, and he's 22 years old now. Like that's not your typical rookie.
Yeah.
So I think the expectations for him were kind of unknown, and he looked pretty solid. He's another guy that's going to start the year in Rockford, but I think for some people not really knowing too much about him coming into camp, I think he really showed that he's at the place that he's in his career. Um, he probably will play in the NHL this season. I don't know when, but I think that'll definitely be a player to look at down the road as a potential call up. And I thought with the injuries to Caleb Jones and Wyatt Kalanick at the back end of training camp, I really thought Galvis would benefit from that, um, and be able to maybe take some ice time in one of those spots left open by those guys. But again, he'll start in Rockford. He'll get a lot of minutes, and I think he'll get up to the NHL this season at some point.
Would you also say Colton Dock impressed because he was in training camp for a while, and he looks almost NHL ready.
Yeah, he stayed around longer than some of the other junior players. I think it's funny. He's another guy who, with the Blackhawks, his name, it's too early to tell right now. But his name may or may not end up doing him no favors,
Yeah.
because he's so closely tied to Kirby that you don't want to say like, oh, he has to make the team when he's a teenager still, and he has to come in and be a top six guy right away. Yeah, he stuck around. He definitely looked pretty good in some of the games that he played. I know in the prospect showcase, he looked pretty solid alongside Lucas Reichel. And then I think it was last night he scored his first goal of the season with Kelowna. So he's off to a good start. I would like to see him. He said recently, before he left training camp, his goal is to make the team next year. I mean, that's a lofty goal. It's definitely the kind of confidence you want to see. And I think if he can, he's just like his brother. He's a big guy. Hopefully he'll turn into a guy that can play in the top six in the NHL. It would be fantastic to get a player like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he's off to a good start.
Yeah. A question: do you think the Hawks will make the playoffs this season?
Man, it's been hard to kind of get a gauge on them because they had a lot of turnover and changes from last year. You went into the season last year expecting the worst, and it ended up being not as bad as I was expecting it to be. They were in the playoff hunt for pretty much three, 3/4 of the season. So I think that was something that was surprising. Now you come into this year and they have super lofty expectations because of the additions that they made with Seth Jones and Tyler Johnson, Marc-Andre Fleury, Jake McCabe. Like you really have a lot of changes coming into the team. On top of that, the return of Jonathan Toews. On paper, those are all great things, but there's so many like boom or bust potential in all of those additions, because you have Seth Jones, who at one point was one of the top 10 defensemen in the NHL, but he has not been that in the last couple of seasons. You have Marc-Andre Fleury coming off of winning the Vezina, but he's also at the very back end of his career. And before he committed to coming to Chicago, how much truth there was to it or not, there was a potential that he may have considered just retiring rather than ending up playing the season with Chicago. So, coming off of winning a Vezina, that's fantastic, but he's going to be 36, 37 years old. Hopefully he can continue to, replicate what he did last season. He's not going to have the same kind of defense in front of him, so that's going to be more of a challenge. Jonathan Toews is a huge question mark because, he's looked healthy, he's looked up to speed through the preseason and through training camp, but we still don't really know exactly how he'll be able to hold up for the regular season. Is he going to be able to play 75 plus games, or is he going to be, halfway through the season, something might happen where he's just physically exhausted? Who knows what'll happen with that. So, there's a lot of people who think, oh yeah, they'll for sure be a playoff team. And then there's some people in the camp that the only team they'll finish above in the division is Arizona. I'm right in the middle of it because I really can't I really can't commit to they're gonna be terrible or they're gonna be great. Um, so I think they'll finish close to a playoff spot, but I think ultimately they'll fall short. But they'll probably, I mean, I would obviously love them to make the playoffs. Um, but I think they'll fall in the like maybe upper 80s, low 90s in points and probably fall short of a wild card spot.
That's fair. Speaking of Seth Jones, what were your first initial thoughts when the trade first happened? Because there's a lot to unpack. You had Adam Bockwas going the other way. There was like
Yeah.
what, 2 first round picks, a second round pick. So what were your initial thoughts back then, and have they changed since then?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a slow burn process because first it was okay. Seth Jones is looking for a trade out of Columbus. A couple teams started being rumored to be potential landing spots, and then I think it like came from him or his agent that Chicago was a team that he would want to go to. Um, so it was kind of was a long rumor process, and eventually everything kind of it came together the way it did. Um, towards the towards the end of that like rumor process before it was actually the deal came about, there were some speculations that like Kirby Doc and Alex DeBrincat would be in a package for Seth Jones, and I that really scared me at
Yeah,
that point because I was just like, you're already bringing in Seth Jones, who has not had the best handful of seasons since he was a Norris candidate, but so that was worrying me. The actual deal for Seth Jones and the extension on top of it, I was not too jazzed about because I thought Adam Boquist was starting to turn a corner in his development. He was pushed into the NHL pretty quickly. Um, Probably was a bit ahead of when he should have been up, but the Blackhawks took that route and kind of were going to give him a bit of a trial by fire once he did stick in the NHL. And he was learning from Duncan Keith, which at the time was a good idea to pair him with a future Hall of Famer to kind of learn the ropes. But he had his ups and downs, but I think towards the end of last season you started to see the defensive side of his game start to come around, and I had hopes for him coming into this season that he'd actually put everything together and be that kind of top pair defenseman that the Blackhawks wanted him to be. But it just seems like they didn't have the patience for that. Maybe some of these other moves that they ended up making were, I'm sure they were already on their mind. So if the front office wanted to accelerate the process and basically be like, we're sick of rebuilding, we don't want to do it anymore. Um, that move of acquiring Jones seemed to trigger that domino effect of being like, this rebuild's over. We're content. We want to contend now. So yeah, it was, you kind of saw it coming, just didn't know what the deal was. And then when the deal actually came out, I was pretty surprised at how hefty it was. And it's really going to put a lot on both Jones and the Blackhawks to succeed together, because after this season, his contract can either look great if he ends up turning his career back in the right direction, or it's just going to be an absolute anchor of a contract, and it's going to be it could end up being really bad. So
yeah,
again, the team is surrounded in boom or bust, and that's probably the biggest factor in that whole scheme.
right.
Do you see Stan Bowman on the hot seat?
Yes, in more ways than one. Um, all the off ice stuff is not going to go away. It didn't go away. The Blackhawks seemed to kind of drag their feet with addressing it, and yeah, I think that whole situation is something that's going to hang over the team and hang over Stan Bowman even after it's resolved. If he's still around, it's even more so. So that's obviously one thing that's on the table for considering him on the hot seat. Um, but for the moves he made, you know, building this team for this season, and like I talked about, like basically ending the rebuild and saying like, no, we're not gonna go through this long, we're not gonna be Detroit and be bad for a couple of years and build up that way. We're gonna try and bring in pieces on the fly, and then when they felt like they could, pull the trigger on a couple big deals, they did, and that was this summer. So, um, if they bust out this season, you might see some managerial changes. You might see some coaching changes too. I mean, this is definitely a team that on paper, should not fall short of the postseason. And if they do, and then if they do spectacularly, um, I think you know I think Bowman's definitely uh, going to be looked at as a scapegoat for it.
Um, could Dylan Strome be moved soon? Because he really hasn't been that noticeable during training camp, and there were rumors, even a year and a half ago that he may be on the move. So could he be traded in a package?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think they have to get their final roster cuts done by tomorrow. I think he's going to be on the NHL roster. Um, I don't think they're gonna leave him off. I think they just have to move two or three guys still. I don't think he's gonna be one of them. But yeah, I mean his role with the team is definitely diminished since the end of the 2019 season. He came to Chicago and was almost a point per game player, playing with Patrick Kane and Alex DeBrincat, and it looked like, okay, this trio of guys are going to be a real problem for the league for years to come if they can replicate that. And it just didn't work out. And um, you know after that season, Strome was looked at as like, okay, maybe he's going to be the number two guy behind Jonathan Toews, maybe eventually take over. But a big problem for him is his ability at the faceoff dot. He's not a 50% or better kind of guy. Um, and while he's got a large frame, he doesn't really play a physical game.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that has kind of caught up to him. I think in the league, I think a lot of teams are now realizing how to play against him, and limit his abilities. Which he's a great playmaker. It's just some of the other physical abilities for him don't stack up to really make him like that, like huge impact player. He's still young. I mean, I would love to be proven wrong still in this season, but um, the thing is, like, what is his value if he's playing in a fourth line or third line, role? If he's playing on a wing rather than center, if he's getting scratched some nights, I mean, what is his value at in the trade market at $3 million? So it's tough to say. I think if he's not producing at a level that's not replaceable this year, I think he could be someone at the deadline that the Blackhawks might move, whether they're contending or not. There could be a couple players this year that step up in that in those roles in the forwards group, in that bottom to middle six group, where you might have someone step up and make Strome expendable. But again, I'd love to see him be back to the 2018, 2019 player, because that just means he's going to be contributing in a large way, and making the team successful.
Right. And along with that, what could you see the Hawks adding at the deadline this year if they're in contention for that playoff spot?
Well, I mean, if they're in contention, that means a lot of the holes that they tried to fix from last year have been addressed. I think the return of Jonathan Toews gives them a guy who can kill penalties, a guy who can win faceoffs again, and someone who can play on the power play. And that was something that they were missing, that kind of like do it all kind of player last year, which is why you saw guys like Kirby Dach and Alex DeBrincat killing penalties towards the end of the year. And you had a hot power play that kind of fell off in the second half of the season. In net last year, you had three guys that were a bunch of maybes, and then Kevin Lankinen ended up becoming pretty decent at the NHL level. But now you have Marc-Andre Fleury, and if he's playing well and Lankinen's playing well, well then goaltending is not a need that you would have to address at the deadline to try and put yourself over the top.
Right.
So I mean, if they're contending, I mean, if I'm really looking at a hole that they could fix, it could be having a veteran forward to play in maybe in a bottom six role that could maybe be a penalty killer, be another face-off guy. Those are never bad things to have. You could look at maybe adding some serviceable size on the defense. I know they had the opportunity to bring back Nikita Zadorov, who has a lot of size, a lot of physicality to his game, but he's not the most mobile defenseman, not the best with the puck. I think they tried to address that this year, bringing in a guy who's defensive but also mobile and pretty decent with his puck skills in Jake McCabe. So I think if you could bring in a guy who could eat some minutes, be physical, and not be a detriment defensively, that could be an option as well. So I think if they're contending, there may not be too many holes to fill. But I mean, it's never a bad thing to try and get yourself a player to try and go over the hill.
Right.
A question I gotta ask, especially as a Preds fan to a Hawks fan, it's one of my favorite questions to ask nowadays. What was your reaction to Pekka Rinne's goal?
Oh, yeah. The goal. I mean, it's cool to see a goalie score, right? I wasn't. I took no offense to him, shooting at the open net and trying to score, and obviously doing that. I think it was the comment of like, oh, easiest goal of my career, something like that. I can't remember the exact comment, but it was something like, some snide comment that I was just like, all right, buddy, like, okay, we get it, it's just something that you just kind of have to kind of laugh at, because that's what we were doing mostly at the Blackhawks at that time. We're just kind of like, of course that happened,
Yeah.
But it's you got to remember at times like this, you got to have some fun with it sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was, it was just one of those things. You're just like, all right, okay, you got us there.
Yeah, I remember on my end it was like I was listening to the game and I wasn't watching it, and I heard the announcers say that he scored, and I double taked and I was like, no, he didn't. Yeah, I know he's been trying. I know he's been trying since like 2014, but he didn't score. And I saw the highlight and I was like, he actually scored, and it was just pretty funny to see. And obviously, Pekka Rinne always had a big chip on his shoulders, so he said a lot of stuff which obviously upset a lot of people. But I always think Pekka Rinne, he was just having fun with a lot of it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, he's one of the most likable players that has played the game in the last decade or so. It's hard to really get on him and things like that. So yeah, it was just one of those, like, it was cool. It was cool to see him score, objectively. But yeah, it was just a a fun rib at that time.
Who's an under the radar prospect that you think could have a big impact soon?
Oof. There's a lot of guys that the Blackhawks have that I think could turn into some nice complementary pieces. I don't think they're that top heavy in their prospect system, but I think a guy that it could fly a little bit under the radar and make a decent impact is a player like Landon Slaggert. He was a third round pick, I think, in 2020. I want to say 2019, 2020. I can't remember exactly. But he's he's got a little bit of Andrew Shaw and Brandon Hagel to his game. He is a high energy player. He's plays with a bit of an edge and has some pretty decent scoring ability that he's showed at the college level so far. He played with Team USA at the World Juniors this past winter, and I believe is eligible to play with them again. So I think he'll make the team again. So it'll be exciting to see him, play. He's at Notre Dame. It'd be exciting to see him play there this year and potentially play with Team USA again. I think he's a guy that could turn into a nice middle six forward, a guy who could, again, like I said, he reminds me a lot of Brandon Hagel. And Brandon Hagel, yeah, he just kind of burst onto the scene last season, but he's a very similar player who can. He's got a little bit of everything, and it's his motor that kind of puts him over the top. So
Right.
I think that's a guy for Blackhawks fans to keep an eye on that maybe is not talked about a lot.
Yeah. What made the Hawks? Obviously, we've seen you tweet in reaction to it, but what made the Hawks bring back Eric Gustafsson?
That just happened a few hours ago. Yeah. Um, the injuries to Caleb Jones and Wyatt Kalanick, two players that I think were pretty much penciled into the NHL roster. Um, that obviously leaves a little bit of a hole in the defensive rotation. Um, so I get adding someone who can be a third pair defenseman, maybe play on the power play. Like I get that, but did they not have someone already there that could do that, like Nicholas Baudin or Ian Mitchell? Like, did you have to bring back Eric Gustafsson, who even during his big season, his career best season in 2018-19, where the Blackhawks across the board were scoring, everyone had like huge years that year, but you still missed the playoffs because you were just god awful defensively, and he was part of that problem. Has he done anything in the last 2 years to be better defensively? I haven't seen it. He's been with the Flames, the Flyers, and the Canadians in that time. He was on a PTO with the Islanders, and was, you're taking a guy that was released off of a tryout contract. Like, even if it's a short-term fix and he has an easy out, could you not have just filled that hole with someone you already had, like, and
Yeah.
it had to be Eric Gustafsson, like.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, I can see why people are like, oh, it's not a big deal, it's a win-win or whatever. Like, okay, I get that, but like, how quickly you forget how much of a just a bad defensive player he was. Just
Yeah.
so I don't know. If he plays sheltered minutes in a sheltered role, like, that's the thing, is like, we're talking about, oh yeah, you bring in a guy that you have to shelter. Like, couldn't if you had to do that, you have guys that you just sent to the Ice Hogs to just sent to the minors to do that. You have Nicholas Baudin, you have Ian Mitchell, you have Jakob Galvis. Like, why do you have to bring this guy back? I don't know. It's just kind of it's quintessentially like the Bowman era Blackhawks, where
Yeah.
every now and then, like, things will be going really well, or excuse me, things will be going in the right direction, right? And then there's just this one thing where it's going to be like, oh yeah, we're going to bring back this random player, or we're going to sign we're going to sign an enforcer for no reason. Like, oh, okay, great. Like,
Uh,
we're gonna bring back Andrew Ladd, or we're gonna, whatever that was about, or it's just these random things that, oh, here's Scott Darling on a PTO.
Brandon Saad would
All
probably be the
right.
biggest example of just bring back old Hawks with Brandon Saad.
I would like Brandon Saad
Yeah,
back.
Brandon Saad's not a bad player.
Yeah,
It's just
I
probably
would.
the
I
most
would.
famous,
Example.
example of
Yeah. Well,
Hawks
I
of
mean,
Bowman just bringing back old players.
yeah. I mean, I would love to have him come back. I'd love to redo that trade to the Avalanche and just not do it. But yeah. So it's just, that's one thing with Bowman, is that you're always, when things are going well for a little while, you always get a little suspicious, because it's like, okay, well, he hasn't re-signed an old player yet. So what are we doing? I'm just glad it wasn't Artem Anisimov.
Oh yeah.
If it's Eric Gustafsson, okay, fine. But You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll see. It could end up being nothing, or it could be a move that decimates the entire season. Who knows?
Um, on the defense as well, like you said, Caleb Jones and Wyatt Killenick are injured. But when they come back from injury, the Hawks will have a lot of defensemen on that roster. And hell, there's a lot of NHL defensemen ready prospects that they have in Rockford. So, who gets sent down when they get back? Would it be Jones and Kellenick? Would it be Ian Mitchell and Riley Stillman? Like, who would it be?
Um, well, I mean, they have four guys that you're going to count on in McCabe, Seth Jones, Calvin DeHaan, and Connor Murphy. Like
Yeah,
those four are locked in. So it's those your fifth and sixth defensemen that are becoming this potential like rotating group or whatever. Um, but I think with Jones, Kalanick is a guy that I thought was going to be in the rotation in the lineup. He played a small sample size last season, but he did really well in it. So I thought he was gonna, and he was having a good camp. I thought he was gonna have an NHL spot. I thought the top six would be the four I mentioned, and then Riley Stillman, and Wyatt Kalanick. And I thought that would be the top six when the season would start. Excuse me, with Caleb Jones, being the seventh defenseman and probably rotating in with Kalanick and Stillman at different times depending
yeah,
on who was playing well. Um, so I think Ian Mitchell will stick around for a bit. I thought Jakob Galvis was going to be in that mix as well, but he just got sent down. So it'll be interesting. I think if I think when Kalanick and Jones come back, I think Mitchell will go down, and then I don't know what they're going to do with a guy like Stillman who they brought in and gave an extension to. I don't know where Gustafsson fits in now. It kind of muddies the water a little bit, but
yeah.
they also have Alec Regula still in camp, but he hasn't played since I think the first or second day of training camp. I think it's a back issue that he's been dealing with, but he's still there. So I don't know if they're just thinking that he's already kind of in the NHL rotation even before camp started, but it's just interesting to me that they haven't said like, okay, you're just gonna start in Rockford, once you're healthy. It's interesting that he's
Right.
still sticking around. So I don't know. It's an interesting situation that's presented itself. But Caleb Jones has been playing well in the preseason. I think when he's healthy, he'll come back to the NHL roster. I think Kalanick will be in the same boat too, because he's only going to miss a handful of games, it seems, as you hope at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be an interesting rotation, and the addition of Gustafsson just kind of makes things awkward.
Yeah. And I think that's it for today. And yeah, it is. So thank you so much for coming on, Mario. Once again, congrats on the baby, and hope you have a good rest of your weekend.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It was good talk with you guys, and yeah, again, happy Thanksgiving. Hope you enjoy it, and yeah, let me know when this comes out, and we'll have a good time with it.